You may remember the last Sunday I told you that the scariest thing you'll ever hear is this: God will let you live the life you choose to live. There is a corollary to that, the scariest thing in the world for fathers to hear: God will let you be exactly the kind of father you choose to be. I hope you'll think about that over the next few minutes, because Father's Day is the great do-over day. It's the day when we as fathers get to reflect on what it means to be a father and to make a decision about whether we want to continue what we're doing or change some things. It's also a do-over day for children. We get to rethink how we relate to our fathers. Father's Day scripturally is a day not only about biological fathers, but a day that celebrates our spiritual fathers. Those men who step into our life, maybe for our entire life or maybe only for a short period, who shape and form us and help us on our journey of faith. Now, one of America's favorite television shows is a program called Modern Family. How many of you have seen it? Raise your hands. Well, that's a lot of you. So it's about this big extended family and how they relate together. And one of the couples is a couple named Phil and Claire. And they're kind of the more traditional part. Some of the family's not traditional, they're very traditional. Phil is a realtor, and he's kind of a goofy guy that does a lot of puns and silly jokes and is always trying to invent something that never quite works out. And he's very emotional. He's the emotional one. His wife is Claire. She works in the closet business with her dad, and she will eventually take that business over, and she's very, very, very strict, stern, get it done type of person. Together they're raising 3 children. Each of the children are different and unique in their own way. I want to mention the oldest child today. Her name is Haley Dunphy, and she's kind of the wild child. I don't know if you ever had one of those in your family. I had one of those in my family growing up. She's kind of the one that whatever is the right thing to do, she'll choose the opposite. Whether it comes to morality or drinking or parties or anything else, time with boys, she always seems to choose what will make her parents the most insane and crazy. Because of that, she's always in the midst of one adventure after another. And she drives her mother nuts, but her dad hangs in there with her. Finally, amazingly, she is admitted to a college after many tries and fails in that department. And so the entire extended family comes together to throw a party to celebrate Haley going to college. And while they're there gathered in Grandpa's house, Claire, the mother, is in the kitchen preparing a few things. Her brother comes in and says, "I hope you don't mind. I don't want to steal the spotlight from Haley, your daughter, tonight, but I want to announce that we're celebrating too because we're sending our daughter to kindergarten. She's starting kindergarten." Claire looks at her brother and says, "The fact that your daughter is going to kindergarten is a result of the law. The fact that Haley is going to college is a miracle." You can't compare the two, in other words. So they have the big party and they celebrate, and finally it's time to pack Haley up and take her to college. And they're packing and preparing, and Phil, the dad, has come down and he has little t-shirts for everyone to wear to take Haley to college that show mom and dad swinging Haley when she was a little girl. He also has prepared, it's wonderful what you did, that really helps. He has prepared a book of his favorite sayings, the things he says and believes. And because his name is Phil, he calls it Philosophy. Philosophy. And he puts it all together in a book and he gives it to her, which she has no real excitement about receiving. They take her to college, mom and dad do, and she's there moving into the dorms, and she refuses to wear the t-shirt that her dad prepared for her. And he doesn't even know if she still has the book. He fears she's probably already thrown it away. And she tells her parents to leave. They'd planned on spending the whole day there, taking her out to dinner somewhere. She tells them she just wants them to go. They're embarrassing her. And she sends them away. Claire is typically stoic and tough, and it's okay, we can handle this. Phil sits in the family van and cries and begins the long drive home. Now, what you may not know about the character of Haley, you may not know about the young woman, a great young actress who portrays her. Her name is Sarah Hyland. She's very, very smart, very intelligent, very dedicated. The fact that she plays this wild young girl is very interesting because she herself is very serious. So it's a great job of acting. A few years ago, she was on all the covers of all the magazines, people criticizing the way she looked. And if you're a father of a daughter, you know the battle there that goes on with that sort of thing. People attacking her because of the way she looked. Nobody knew that she had a terrible kidney disease, that she was in fact on the verge of death. She went through an entire couple of years in and out of clinics and hospitals. And she said the only way she was able to get through that was because she had a champion who was there at every doctor's appointment, there at every kidney treatment, there at every test, there at every procedure, who always was there. In the modern medical world, you have to have somebody that helps you get through the system. She said, I had that person who not only took care of me physically, but took care of me spiritually. My daddy. It's a very rare story you hear something like that in Hollywood, right? But here's a beautiful young woman growing up, and in the time of her life when she was most vulnerable, her dad was there for her. In fact, she had to have a kidney transplant or her life would come to an end. And it was her father who gave her a kidney. He's a great Broadway actor. He put his career completely on hold and dedicated that time of his life to caring for his daughter. I suppose as fathers, we would all say, well, I would do anything for my children. I would do anything. I would be there for them. I would care for them. I would love them. I would support them. If I had to give them a kidney, I would. Whatever it takes, I would be willing to do it. And I'd like to believe that that's true, but the numbers say otherwise. In fact, there's a very interesting book out right now called The Good News About Behavior. And it's sort of a collection of all of the things we know about young people right now, written by Catherine Reynolds Lewis. She looks at what's going on in American childhood, and she gathers all the latest data, particularly referencing one report that's been out you may have heard about, in which it's statistically shown that children between 5 years old and 18 years old growing up in America right now, at least 50% of them by the time they turn 21 will either be chemically addicted or have a severe mental health issue. That's the kind of culture we live in right now. D.W. Winnicott, the great child psychiatrist who really invented the field of family therapy, says that every ill in our culture today can be traced to absent fathers. Now, he's not talking about just dads who aren't at home, but fathers who are in the home, but spiritually and emotionally absent. Think about the weight of that. Now, both of those things may be overstated, but even if they're 75% true, 60% true, that's a devastating thing. In the book, The Good News About Bad Behavior, she points out the fact that we're no longer raising our children, that we're allowing a media culture to raise our children, that the stories, the narrative they learn about life comes from outside of the home. We no longer have extended families to support and reaffirm what parents are trying to teach. I can remember my grandson one time saying to me, Papa, I don't want to do what Mom says. Will you tell her I don't have to do it? And I said, let me just tell you, when you were born, I signed on to your mom's program and your dad's program. Whatever they say, I'm here to help them do it. Right? But a lot of kids don't have that extended family experience. She points out one thing that's really interesting in the book to me, and that is that we no longer play with our children. We allow our children to play with gadgets and gizmos and with people on the internet, but we don't sit down and actually play with our children anymore. Fathers, that's so important, whether that's taking the boat around the lake or being out on the ball field or building something in the garage together, whatever that is, that's the place where family identity is communicated. That's the place where young people are shaped by story and narrative. And fathers, it's our responsibility to pass on the story of our family and our faith to our children and shape their identity as people and especially as children of Jesus Christ. Now, the Bible addresses this in a really interesting way. You remember the culture in Jesus' time was very much a meal culture. Who you ate with was a big deal. Because when you broke bread with someone, it was a way of saying, we're equals, we're family. I'm committed to you, you're committed to me. We see that reenacted every time we have communion. That's where that part of communion comes from, is that culture. And so Jesus has been called to eat dinner at a Pharisee's house, and all the right people are there. All the right people. One time I entered a new church, and someone came up to me and said, what is your evangelism program? And I started to talk about it, and he said, no, let me just tell you, we just want the right people in this church. Right? It's pretty crass. But that's what the Pharisees were doing to Jesus. They invited Jesus to this big, nice, fancy banquet. And the people were eating outside, and all the good people were at the table, quote unquote. Meanwhile, because Jesus was in town and it was a big deal, others came and gathered around. He had an audience while he ate. You think about some of the big celebrities and stars and athletes when they go to a restaurant or go to the mall, how people don't sit at the table with them but will stand and watch from the outside. One time I saw Serge Ibaka when he played for the Thunder. He was at a meal. I ran over to get an autograph, something I normally would never do. I told him it was for my grandson. It's hanging on my wall at the parsonage if you want to see it. Afterwards, I thanked one of the men who was with him. It's when Serge had first come to Oklahoma City. I thanked one of the guys who were there taking care of Serge. So I really appreciate him doing that. And the guy said, he didn't understand a single word you said. Right? But that's how it was. So Jesus is at this meal. Everybody around is looking in to see what's going on. And the Pharisees, particularly the host, you got to think about this. He's welcomed Jesus to his table, but the first thing he does is he confronts Jesus. Now, to our Western ears, that seems very distasteful and discourteous, right? If Uncle Joe comes to Thanksgiving dinner and he's wearing a goofy tie, we tell him how wonderful it is, even though inside we're thinking, how can he still be wearing that thing, right? In Western culture, that's what we do. But in Jesus' culture, it was different. It was normal to engage people in conversation. Back then, they were actually able to talk about things without starting wars. It's different today, but back then, it's the way it was. And so the Pharisee says to him, Jesus, what's wrong with you? You sit down at table and eat with sinners. Now remember, in this culture, who you eat with is everything. In fact, my very good friend and the Old Testament and New Testament Bible scholar John Holbert from SMU, John says that Jesus was hung on the cross, crucified on the cross, because he had bad table manners. He was always eating with the wrong people, right? So the Pharisee says, Jesus, what's this business about you eating with sinners? Implying, of course, the good people who sit at the table, we're not sinners. God has sort of straightened out the world so that the good people are at the top. He's blessing them. They're obviously good people. The poor people are at the bottom. They're obviously bad people because God makes them poor. Jesus does not accept that view of the world. Now, he could either confront his host directly, he could get up and walk out, or he could smile and acquiesce and just eat the roast lamb or whatever was there, probably what I would have done. But instead, Jesus does something that's very important. Again, in this culture, he tells a story. In fact, he tells 3 stories, which was entertainment in those days. And fathers, I really hope that you will catch the power of this. He tells 3 stories. He tells a story about a shepherd and a lost lamb, a shepherd who leaves the flock behind to go and retrieve that one lost lamb, risking the entire flock. He tells a story about a woman who loses a coin and goes and searches for it until she finds it, refusing to give up until it's found. And then he tells a story about a father. I know the story is called the prodigal son story. Charles Dickens called it the greatest story ever written. Even the Rolling Stones sung about it on Beggar's Banquet album. But it is the story of a father. Prodigal means someone who wastes his life. That's not what the story is about. Jesus began, once upon a time, there was a man who had 2 sons. And the youngest son came to him and said, "Father, give me my inheritance now." Now imagine that if one of your children came to you and you're still alive and they said, "What do you have in the will for me?" "Okay, I'll take that today." "Saw the garage off, I'll take that, that'll be my part of the house." Right? Or go liquidate your retirement funds and give me my part of it. It's as good as saying to the father, "You're dead to me, I could care less about you." Nonetheless, the father does not complain, he does exactly that. And the boy goes off to the far country. Now, I don't know if you've ever done this, but I've been to the far country. It sounds good, it looks good, they have great neon lights that flash and make everything wonderful, but once you get there, it's not so great. I spent at least 10 years of my life trying to prove to my family that I was my own man and didn't want to have anything to do with them, didn't want to be identified with them in any way, and didn't want any part of their religion. And none of it made me happy. This young man goes off. He soon goes through all of his money. And then he does the unspeakable for a Jewish boy. He goes to work for a hog farmer feeding the hogs. Now, if you remember some of Jesus' stories, you remember he confronts a madman, takes the evil demons out of him, casts them into pigs. Pigs were really bad in Jewish culture. In fact, I don't like them myself. When I was a boy, my mother sent me to my uncle's farm to work every summer, and I had to feed the hogs. And to this day, when I get to this point in the story, I feel a little queasy. I don't like it very much. In fact, as the boy is feeding the hogs, he notices that the pigs are eating, and he is not. There's a famine in the land, and whenever you get the word famine in the Bible, you know things have hit rock bottom. It's like someone who is struggling with alcoholism, and they have to hit that bottom place before they can turn their life around, and he has hit that bottom place. It says, in fact, that he's ready to eat the carob pods that the hogs are eating. I'm not exactly sure what a carob pod is, but I know it's bad. Because every time it appears in the Bible that someone is eating the carob pods, they are down on their luck. Things are bad. And so he does exactly what I did when I had left home. I left home when I was 16 years old, a junior in high school. I moved out of my home. He did exactly what I did. He starts to fantasize about what it would be like to go back. If you've ever been in the far country, you know that, right? When you're in the far country, you start to think, what would it be like if I could just go back to the way things were? And he comes up and he draws this drama up in his head about, I'm going to go back and my dad's going to be so mad, but I'm going to make this beautiful, eloquent speech about how I'd just be happy to be one of his hired hands. You know, I'm going back to Bonanza, and Ben is my dad, and I'm little Joe, and I've run off, and I'll come back and say, I don't need to be little Joe anymore. Just make me one of the hired hands. I'll sleep in the bunkhouse. That's all I want. He gets this whole thing worked up in his head. And he goes back, and he's coming to home, and his daddy sees him. Now, you got to understand in this culture that if you're wealthy and powerful, one of the big rules is you never run. I have one of these I wear one day a week usually, and I will tell you, just walking through the building, getting them down the stairs is a challenge, so I understand why. The more powerful you were in that culture, the longer your rope, and they didn't run. Slaves ran for you. If there was something that had to be done in a hurry, you sent a servant to do it. There's also another little indicator in the story about how bad things are going because this boy no longer has shoes. And just like in our culture, if you don't have shoes, you don't own a pair of shoes, things are really tough. His father sees that, takes it all in. He pulls up his robe, and he runs to meet him. Convention, propriety, what his neighbors might think, what the people that work for him might think, what his own family might think, don't matter a lick to this daddy. His boy is home. In fact, he said, the son I thought was dead is alive. And then there's this restorative act. He says, put shoes on his feet, symbol of wealth and position. Put the best robe on him, the robe that identifies that he is the head of the family. Put the ring upon his finger, the signet ring, the signature. It's a way of saying, go down to the bank and tell him he can sign on checks again. Right? And he welcomes him home with a party. He says, go get the best we have. Prepare a table. Remember? This is a story about who's welcome at the table. And set my son down at the table and let's feast. Now, fathers, I just have one thing to say about this part of the story. Every child is a prodigal child. Every child is a prodigal child. Some of them reinforce that for you in big, dramatic ways. Some do it in very quiet, simple ways. But every child is that child wondering if they're welcome and if they have a place at your table. That doesn't mean there aren't times you have to have discipline. There are times you have to have discipline. That doesn't mean that you should never say no. You need to say no. The question for them is do they belong? Do you care about them? Are they welcome even when they fail? When I was a young man in college, I went through a divorce. It was one of the worst things, probably the worst thing that ever happened to me. And when I got through that divorce, I wondered if I'd ever have a life again, would ever have a family of my own again. And a few years, I met Prudy, and we dated for about 3 years. I got to know her daughters. We became very, very close. And we were both, at an age that at that point that we could make our own decisions. But I respected her dad. And I thought I should go to her dad and ask his permission to marry his daughter. And so I asked to meet him. We often met him for meals. He loved to go to breakfast at Beverly's restaurant. I went to Beverly's this time without Prudy. One interesting sidebar about him is he would always pay for breakfast for his daughters, but he would not buy bacon for them. But when I showed up, he started buying bacon for me. So I had a pretty good idea I was in, right? And I sat down with Alan and I said, I would like to marry Prudy. And he looked me square in the eye and he said, why have you waited so long? Right? He goes, are you like the only person in the whole world that didn't know you were going to get married? And he said, it just was so great. He said, I see my daughter with you and she's so happy. I see my granddaughters with you and you're a family. He said, I want you, to me, he said, I want you, Robert, to be a part of our family. Can you imagine saying that to someone who had been through a divorce, who'd seen his own family broken and shattered? What it meant to be included that way. My dad died when I was 8 years old. I knew Prudy's dad longer and better and had a closer relationship with him than I had with my own father. In fact, every single day of his life, through the end of his life, there was never a day that I did not get affirmation and encouragement from him. Every person needs someone like that in their life. I don't care how old you are. It's not about biology. That sometimes sets it up. It's about being willing to take on that role. Prudy's dad became not just my father-in-law, not just my friend, but a spiritual mentor to me. He had 2 sons-in-laws, both of us son-in-laws, who were Methodist preachers. But let me tell you, he led the family spiritually. Humbly, quietly, but he led. Every child is a prodigal child. Every child needs to know they're loved. Now, of course, there's another part to the story, right? There's a postlude to the story. And that occurs when the older brother, who's still working out in the fields, finds out that there's a party going on for his younger brother. And he refuses to go into the party. Again, if you've ever had a sibling, you probably have had a similar experience of of your sibling refusing to participate in your moment of triumph, right? And once again, in this culture, the father did not go out to meet the child. The lord of the manor didn't go out to meet anybody. People came to meet him. Pick up the book of Esther and read it, and you'll understand more about that. But once again, this father defies culture. He grabs up his robes, lifts them up, leaves his party that he's hosting, and goes and finds his oldest son. And immediately the oldest son starts to go through this litany of things his little brother has done wrong. Too often we're willing to point out what people have done wrong instead of being willing to welcome them back. At this point, we don't know what the younger brother has done. The New Revised Standard Version said he had dissolute living, right? But the older brother knows, and he goes through a list. Well, he was with this woman and this woman and this. That's how he spent your money, father. The father embraces this older brother. He says, you're with me always. Nothing has changed our relationship. I know who you are. I love you. And the story ends. Now, if you don't understand Jewish culture, you may miss a little bit of what's going on here. In fact, in Jewish culture, this father has one goal, and that is to make his family whole. Everything the father has done has been about that. And fathers, we have that responsibility to make our families whole as best we can. As far as what is in our power, that's our calling. And this father is willing to set aside propriety or who respects him or who cares about him or who looks good at him and who makes fun of him. He doesn't care about any of that. His children are the priority and his family is the priority. And this is a day when we as fathers can take a few moments to ask ourselves the question, have we made our children a priority? Have we made our families a priority? You may think, I'm saying, are we spending enough time with them? That's certainly part of it, but I'm saying, have we prayed for them? Have we shared our faith with them? Have we asked them about their life, their dreams, their hopes, their visions? Have we reassured them that they always have a place at our table and in our hearts? There's an ending to the story of Haley in Modern Family. She shoos her parents away, and I'm reminded of the prodigal son story, what maybe is most important about it. Fathers, sometimes we just have to hang in there. Sometimes it's about patience and being willing to stay committed, even when it's not easy. Haley has broken her heart's dad. He's driving home in the van. She goes in a scene. She walks into the school cafeteria, and all the kids are in groups. She doesn't know anybody. For the first time in her life, she's not the prettiest girl. For the first time in her life, she's not the most popular girl. She sits alone and eats. Later, we see her back in her dorm room alone. She's wearing the shirt her dad made for her. And she's reading the sayings from the book of philosophy. She picks up the phone. She calls her father. As he's driving along, we hear the conversation in the van. She says, thank you, Daddy. I love you. The word of God for the people of God. Amen. We're all prodigal children.